The thing about that, Tom, is if you spend most of your life out in the muck, up to your ass in bird guano, you better be pretty open to ideas and not take yourself too seriously. And a good sense of humor also goes a long way. But I think the most crazy thing I did was years ago under Ronald Reagan as president, he had a James Watt as the Secretary of the Interior. And James Watt wanted to cut the forests. So I made up a big sign that had emblem of the National Forest Service, and I placed it off a major highway in the mountain range east of Seattle where there was a clear cut, and I called it James Watt's National Forest. And thousands of people a day would look at this sign, and it looked so professional that they thought it was real. And I was just doing it as a condemnation of James Watt. And I would have been arrested if somebody knew I had done that. And years before that, when I was even 13, I destroyed some bulldozers.
Greetings, folks, and welcome back on the show. If someone travels 9 months a year, publishes over 100 books, builds Japanese gardens, and still has time for a good meal somewhere along the way, the obvious question is, does he cook as well as he photographs? If this kind of curiosity sounds familiar, folks, you're in the right place. I'm Tom Jacob, and this is the Camera Cafe Show. Today, folks, I'm joined by one of the most influential nature and travel photographers of our time, Art Wolfe. And for this conversation, I'm also joined by my podcast colleague, Rich Clark. Over the course of this wide-ranging talk, from his early days carrying a 4x5 camera into the mountain to publishing well over 100 books, leading workshops across the globe, and constantly reinventing himself as a photographer and a storyteller. We talk about creativity, travel, books, legacy, close calls in the field, the shift from film to digital, and the mindset that keeps him moving forward after all these years. There are plenty of stories in this one, a lot of laughs, and a lifetime of experience packed into a single conversation. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into it with the legendary Art Wolfe. Welcome, Art Wolfe, today on our podcast. Art, it's a pleasure having you today for a little talk about photography.
Tom, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me.
And before I forget, Art, you see this nice cup we have of the podcast. You know what is here inside?
Coffee. Tequila.
No. Tequila, Don Julio. If the interview gets too strong, have a sip. But I think it's too early for tequila there in Seattle now.
It is.
Yes.
But only by a few hours.
They say it's always 6 o'clock somewhere, so.
That's exactly right. I tell myself that every time I get out of bed really early to go to the airport. Somewhere around the world, everybody's having dinner and having a great time. So it helps me get out of bed knowing other people are already up and enjoying life.
Art, how would you describe your career in one sentence to someone who doesn't know you or your work?
I would say it's restless. My whole career has been evolving and changing subjects. And I always got that from my instructors in the University of Washington School of Painting. It is that they kept on goading me or encouraging me not to rest on my laurels. In other words, never just be happy with one genre or one style. Otherwise, you'll die of boredom. Now, that wasn't true for a lot of the painters I studied, but in today's world where last week there's a new technology and next week there's a new thing, I'm just broadening my perspective on subjects and photographing things that I wouldn't have considered even 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Art, how old are you now?
73.
73.
Fantastic. Amazing.
If your birthday comes up, Art, you are the person who gets a bit like reflective, or you just look straight ahead and go on?
Yeah, I tend to not be reflective. I'm just moving on to the next project. In fact, I've got 3 books nearly completed that are waiting to be published. And now I'm thinking about where to go next. So I never look back. I am only looking forward. I'm in denial, in other words.
I guess that's a good thing to do. let's walk a bit back. Art. Like,
Okay.
I think when
Oh,
you were 6 or 7, you got a book about animals. You studied it and you developed your fascination there for it. You were always an outdoor kid when you were young.
yeah. I was that kid in the forest back in the 50s in Seattle. Where I live now, I'm surrounded by houses, although I planted 500 trees around my house, so I can't see any other houses. But where I grew up was 1 mile from here. We had horses, sheep, chickens all around. Everybody in the neighborhood had some sort of farm animal. And today it's modern part of the city. But back then there were wooded ravines and I would just go in and be gone all day long, kind of rooting around and getting dirt under my fingernails and all those kind of things. But you're right. I had a little bird book, mammal book, tree book, and I studied them and became an expert on identifying the local plants, all the birds, mammals. And so I was a naturalist at 7 without even understanding the word naturalist.
Mm-hmm. And I think your father was a photographer and your mother a painter, right?
That is true. My father was working off an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific. He had one of those old box cameras with bellows.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, when he met my mom, they got married, of course, and she took a correspondence course in painting and illustration. And I, as a little kid, were watching her and emulating what she was doing. So from an early age, painting was part of my history. I never got into wedding photography as did my dad after World War II, but he gave me his
Mm-hmm.
camera when 4x5 cameras were obsolete for weddings. And so I started climbing mountains with these old 4x5s, black cloth over the head. The image was upside down. You would have to load your holders, but that was great training and discipline for me.
So, was that your gateway into photography? Because did you study art originally at university or college?
Yeah, my original inspiration was to be a painter and then maybe have galleries represent me. But as I was in art school, my friends that I played with in the forest became climbers. And then I got to climbing classes and I started going up the volcanoes and the glaciers in and around Seattle. And my allegiances shifted much the way Tom history was. I switched from conjuring up a meaningful painting to taking pictures because it suited my temperament and I could create original photos much faster than a painting. So that's when the career shift happened. It was probably my 4th year of college. And so I graduated with a fine art painting degree and an art education degree, which meant I had to learn how to speak in front of an audience and take speech classes and all those because I, like most people, was petrified to get up in front of a group of peers and talk. But I broke through that fear really quick when I was 1 year as a substitute teacher in the school district.
You enjoyed that time teaching kids in school?
I hated it. I hated it. I thought I was going to go to jail because I wanted to punch some of these kids. They were so mouthy and, they were kids, but I wasn't that much older than them. But I learned how to use my voice to catch attention. It's almost like a cat or a wild cat or a wild dog being cornered. You either fight or die. And so I learned how to stand up and really take command of the class. And that was a big mental breakthrough. That gave me the courage and the confidence a couple of years later to go to National Geographic, to Audubon, Smithsonian, these national magazines or international magazines, and actually sell stories to them. Had I not had that degree in art education, I suspect I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Now you mentioned art, National Geographic. You remember the first assignment you did for them?
Yeah, I on my very first trip to Washington, D.C., I had some photographs of owls and they liked the idea. I went back, shot the story, and it replaced a existing story that they weren't really that crazy about in the magazine. And so I still had the record from the time the subject was shot to the time it was printed in the magazine. And that was back in the late 70s, I believe, or early 80s.
And how was National Geographic in that time? They give you just a bunch of rolls of film?
Yeah, it was a great time actually to be a photographer for Geographic, because then I did a story on swans. Then I had a book project in the Soviet Union where I was to document all the biospheres and, natural areas that were closed off to the average person. I was able to get into and do. And yet, back in those days at National Geographic, whatever they published, they owned the copyright. And that went directly opposition to what I was trained in art school. Whatever you created, you owned the copyright. So I quickly did 2 stories and a book for them, but then I moved on and started doing fine art books. And 5 decades later, I think there's over 115 books that I've worked on. And so with the training as an artist, you want your photos to appear in a beautiful book rather than a magazine that was on stands for, less than 30 days.
Your friend Frans Lanting, I think he's working already for many, many years for National Geographic.
I think he started exactly at the same time I did, but he stayed with National Geographic, whereas I started working on books. We're good friends and we're the same age. And I think he and I were aware of each other's work from the beginning. And so in many ways, we were competing for page space in periodicals, and that made me a better photographer and made him a better photographer because, if there's nobody out there doing the same thing, you kind of easily could get lazy, I think. So a little bit of competition keeps you moving forward and keeps you, driven a bit. And I'm definitely driven.
You mentioned a moment Russia before art. Can it be I read somewhere that the only negative experience you had in your life on a travel was in Russia?
Now I can add China as well. Yeah, in Russia, there was a magazine being published in the Soviet Union called America, and not spelled like America, but America. And they did a profile on me. And then the Soviet government invited me to come to Siberia to photograph the wonders of Siberia in February, which is cold and dark. And I actually got a couple shots that I loved, but there was no food at the time. And my interpreter would leave at 4:00 and I would stay in a dimly lit room watching TV that I couldn't understand. And there was no socialization and it was demoralizing. And I just thought, this is not a place for me. And 2 weeks later, I was in Australia and Sydney at the height of the summer looking at Mardi Gras. And it was just so different that I just didn't want to go back to the Soviet Union. And about 4 years ago, I was going to lead a tour to Tibet because I was on the first Western expedition allowed into Tibet by the Chinese government. And I wanted to go back, 40 years later to photograph Mount Kailash, which is a sacred mountain for both the Hindus and the Buddhists, and lead a tour as well. But the Chinese government would not issue me a visa to come into Tibet because they get on the internet and they check you out. And if you're a photographer, they find more reasons not to allow you to come into Tibet because they always assume you're going to do a negative story on the Chinese invasion of Tibet. So all my participants, some 10 people, were in Lhasa waiting for me, and I could not get into Tibet. So it was a disaster. Though they went on the tour with a local Tibetan guide, they knew the difference. And so both China and the Soviet Union are not my favorite places to travel.
They're not on your list.
No.
But then you go to Bhutan next year again?
Yeah, I love Bhutan because Bhutan is one of those countries that put great value on natural beauty, the forest. It's illegal to cut a tree in Bhutan. They value tradition. So most of the people are walking around in their traditional dress. And it's just a beautiful country. Whereas neighboring Nepal, which I also like Nepal, but they've cut so much of their forests that they are dealing with erosion and loss of habitat, and it goes on and on and on. There's a lot of trouble in Nepal with their natural scenery and health, But Bhutan was ruled by a succession of kings, and they closed it off to the outside world for the longest time. And some 20 years ago, they started opening it up, and I started traveling there and had a great experience.
I saw on your website you have places left to go. It sounds an amazing experience there.
Well, there's two places I'm going to this year that I've never been to. One is Saudi Arabia, and the other one is Uzbekistan. So I'm always, every year, I want to find a few new locations to explore. And so I'm being invited to come to Saudi Arabia and go to the Red Sea where resorts are being built. The Prince of Saudi Arabia is rapidly trying to turn it into a tourist location. And the sister of a close friend of mine has been hired by the prince to make that happen. You never thought Saudi Arabia was opening up, but it really is.
You have any idea how many countries you visited throughout the years?
No. I don't keep track of the number of books, the number of countries, the number of days. I'm not wired that way. Some people travel to every country on the earth just so they can brag that they've been to every country. I go back to Japan 25 times, or prior to the Tibet incident in China, I've been in China probably 15 times. So Africa 60 times over 5 decades. And that's just a guess. But I'm not traveling just to say that I've been to every country. I'm not motivated by that. I'm motivated by the subject that I find in these countries.
Is there like a destination, Art, that feels like a second home for you? For this, I was asking it.
Well, I just led 2 tours with my long-term assistant, Gabriel Jacan, who's from Romania. We led 2 tours down to New Zealand. And New Zealand and the mountains are very familiar to me. They have a coastline right next to the mountains, which is very familiar to me. It's pretty easy to travel. So I could see actually living in New Zealand if I ever was kicked out of America. Everywhere I go, I find lovely people and great subjects. So other than the Soviet Union, I'm sure the people in the Soviet Union are very nice people. It's the government, of course, that is always a problem, not unlike America at this present time. We have bad leadership, and that's true with a lot of countries around the world right now. There's really terrible leaders that are fighting and all that. But we'll keep this positive. We won't go into a political discussion.
You've traveled to loads of really remote and challenging places, but what has been your most challenging experience, would you say, on your travels?
Oh, that's an easy one. Thanks, Richard. I once petitioned the Falkland government to allow Gabriel and I to stay camping on South Georgia Island for 10 days. And so they gave us permission because they were overseeing South Georgia, which is 400 miles southeast of the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas, if you're. At any rate, we got dropped off by a Russian icebreaker and picked up by a German passenger ship 10 days later. And during those 10 days, there was just this terrible storm. And in fact, the Russian icebreaker tucked into a harbor probably 10 miles away and stayed there for about 3 days, waiting out huge waves and turbulent seas. But we were trapped in this bay. We had thousands of seals, but millions of penguins around us. And the seals got in under our tent and won't leave. These are baby seals. But I would say that was the most challenging, because to get out of the tent and to stand up was difficult. And we were trying to do film there, which later was used to encourage Microsoft and Canon to sponsor a TV program that's aired around the world, including Spain. So it was called Travel's the Edge. But those early days, we were trying to get film of me trying to talk amongst millions of flamingos, millions of penguins. And it was windy so much that it was hard to hold the camera steady. So I think, Richard, that was a real challenging trip for me. But I've been on many where I've gone into the Karakoram Range to K2. I lived for 3 months on the northeast ridge of Mount Everest. All of those were challenging, but I was a younger person back then, and I had those climbing skills, but they were still cold and difficult to do.
So were you ever scared at all, or were you like safe within your team again?
Well, if you're really trained in mountaineering, you are aware of the unintended consequences of an avalanche in the big Himalayas. And in fact, I lost a really close friend in an avalanche, never to be found again. Over the years, I've lost a couple other friends to climbing accidents. So the mountains, as they say, really don't care. In terms of fear, I'm not wired to be fearful. And in fact, it can be a bad thing because a certain amount of fear can keep you sharp and aware of other things. But several years ago, I was doing a book called The Living Wild, and we were nearly killed by the largest of the rhinos, the great one-horned Indian rhino. And that was in Royal Chitwan National Park in southern Nepal. And it attacked us. We were on foot with two guides with walking sticks, but that's all we had. And the only thing that saved our lives was the type of tree that we were able to get to, and it had roots above the ground. It was a fig tree, a banyan tree, and they have what they call buttressed roots that are above the ground, and they're almost like a fence or a barrier to an animal like a rhino, because they can't jump over it. And so we were fearful because these two animals, the mother and its full-grown calf, were trying to kill us, literally trying to kill us. And later we found out that in this national park, every year, 20 people are either severely injured or killed by these rhinos. And it's mainly, the reason is it used to be the hunting grounds for the former kings of Nepal. So the rhinos passed down this memory of humans being something to kill rather than just look at. And so the rhinos have it in their DNA to stomp or to gore people that get caught out in the forest of Royal Chitwan National Park. So fear is something I don't live with, but after a couple of incidences like that, you are a little more aware. I'm leading a walking tour to walk with polar bears next year. I feel very confident doing that. And every year, Gabrielle and I take a group of 10 people up and we put them really close to brown bears and cubs. And I know the bears, and there's probably 100 bears that use this area during the summer months when the salmon are running. But these bears are full of salmon, and they have reconciled and are comfortable around humans. And by the end of my tour, people are really comfortable around brown bears. And when I say close, they can come within 1.5 meters of you with their cubs, and you just stay there. You stand there, and they'll just walk right by you. You can reach out and touch them. So it's pretty great experience.
Or maybe you're the one that can run the fastest in your group.
I don't think at 73 that's true.
Art, with being out of your house, I think 9 or 10 months in a year, how you pack your luggage for trips that involves such different climates and situations?
Oh, what a perfect question that is, Tom. Right now, I'm packing, I'm leaving in less than 10 days for an Indonesian dive trip, which will be tropical. Then I'll go up to Bangkok for about 3 or 4 days. Gabriel Jacan lives in Thailand, in the north of it. He'll fly down to Bangkok. We'll fly into Delhi, India, we have a tour that will take people out looking for tigers. And then we end that tour with the Kumbh Mela, which is the biggest gatherings of Hindus along the Ganges. And it happens every 12 years. So we got tropical seas. We got really cold conditions early in the morning in open air Jeeps looking for tigers. And then it's pretty cool in the mornings at the Kumbh with mild afternoons. So that's fairly easy. It's cold clothing and warm clothing. But in a couple of weeks after that is really a difficult trip because I'm first going into Germany to give a talk at an opera house on the border of France and Switzerland and Germany. Then I'll fly back down to Bangkok, and Gav will come down to Bangkok, and then we'll fly up to Tokyo, and we lead a wintertime tour in Hokkaido. And from there, and that's really cold clothing to pack for. And from there, I fly into Saudi Arabia, which in early March will still be quite cool. And then from there, I go into Tanzania for another 12-day tour, which should be a little wet, but warm. So all those different trips require perhaps different clothes and different gear. That's a 46-day tour. And I'm really not looking forward to it. But this opportunity to go into Saudi Arabia came during what normally would be my downtime. And so I'm conflicted. I really want to go. And yet it would have been nice to have that downtime. But I'm going. That opportunity won't arise again, I'm sure. So I'll take advantage of that. But that was a great question. It's packing for really distinct different destinations, or even the kind of lenses or whatever you bring is really tied to the specific part of that trip, as you know, Tom.
But then, of course, you have a great little team behind you that can remind you to bring extra trousers, Art.
It is true. I have a staff of about 5 people, and 2 of the women have worked for me for over 32 years. Gabrielle Jacon has worked side by side with me for over 30 years. I've got a couple other people that are 15 years. So I am very loyal to the people that work for me. But more importantly, when I'm traveling so much, they run the ship and they have the rights to initiate projects or sign contracts and do those kind of things. So I think not micromanaging a group of people ensures that they are happy. And when I'm gone, they're probably even happier. And so it's a good team. You know, when you know somebody so well, they understand who you are and the good and the bad of that. And the bad, I don't know if there's anything bad about working for me, but I'm sure they would have a few things to say about that.
If you keep the tequila flowing, they'll be very happy to you.
Yeah, you know, tequila gets to the point really quick. That's my favorite drink because I'm not a beer drinker. I only feel bloated and too full. But tequila, you know, for type A people, which I am, a little self-medication, whatever form it may be, is not a bad thing. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
I wanted to do a shout out to, I think she's called Deirdre, the one who
Deirdre.
replies your emails.
Yeah, Deirdre.
Deirdre.
Yes.
She's very, very good. And she seems a funny girl too. A little gear question, Art. She was the one who told me that you shoot Canon now, but you started with Nikon and then you switched. And she says maybe there is a story there.
Well, you know, the time I've gone from Canon to Nikon to Canon to Nikon to Canon. And in between, I've had Pentax. I shot an entire body of work called The Human Canvas in studios with a Leica system, which was beautiful, you know, a very large format. But she probably laughs because I'm not a gearhead. I'm not a geeky, you know, I'm more about the animal and the natural history than the technology used to capture it. I'm very happy with Canon, but I'm also aware that Nikon and Sony and other systems are brilliant as well. So I never kind of get into that, you know, argument, which is better. It just seems useless energy for me. It's all about the subject and how you use your camera that's important.
What made you jump from film to digital?
Well, the people on my staff said, "When are you going to switch to digital?" And I said, "I don't know." They said, "Well, if you don't switch now, you'll be a dinosaur tomorrow." So they were trying to goad me on. And I was waiting until digital was on par with the slide film that we're shooting at the time. And it was probably around the time that it became a 12 megapixel camera that I took to Antarctica along with 500 rolls of film. I had never used a computer and knew I didn't know how to download, but I was trained by my staff. So here I'm on a ship on my way to Antarctica. I went out with a digital camera and photographed beads of water on the railing of the ship in miserable conditions. But within 5 minutes, I'm looking at it on a computer. And that connection, that reward, that verification instantly, all 500 rolls of film came home unused. It was just like a meat cleaver, end of film, beginning of digital. It was just no two ways about it. I was hooked on it because I could validate what I was shooting, which allowed me to move on to a new subject. Whereas with film, you couldn't tell for months. Like if I was on Everest for 3 months, it would be 4 months before I'd see the photos I took prior. And so I love digital because of that. And of course, it's only gotten better and better and better and better.
And now at 73 Art, you are happy to pack lightweight, or you still carry all the stuff and all the gear?
Well, did Deirdre give you this list of questions to ask me? Because they're really good questions. On this trip that I'm heading, I've got underwater housing, of course, for the dive trip. But when I'm in India, I'll only have one camera and one lens probably in my lap, and that would be a R5 Canon with a 1-500. And that's really all I need for tigers in the field. And I'll have a backup camera wrapped in bubble wrap in my duffel bag. I've got also a wide angle for when I go to the Kumbh and photograph people. And have you been to the Kumbh Mela? Incidentally,
Yes.
Okay, so if you're walking around, you get invited into sadhu tents and a wide angle to show the sadhu, but also the background is important.
Yeah.
So I'm very judicious on what I bring, and it all goes on my back, and I don't have a little wheel carrier. And so when I'm walking through airports, people look at this white-haired old man carrying a backpack, and it confuses them because maybe I should be using a walker rather than carrying a backpack. But at any rate, yeah, you absolutely got it right. The newer equipment is lighter. Everything gets lighter for the aging boomers, which I am. And so I'm not begrudging that. I'm happy with lighter things on my back. And I think to that point, Tom, I think that a lot of people starting out feel that they have to have every Nikon lens or every Sony lens, and they buy everything and they get weighted down really quick. I see that all the time when I'm teaching workshops or leading international tours. They bring too much stuff because they're not that familiar with what these lenses can do. And surely they must have everything. And I always say, pare it down to the minimum, and you can always walk forward or walk backwards to make up for 2 or 3 of those lenses that you're bringing along.
A reason also we don't discuss a lot of gear, because Art, when I look at your pictures, I don't think of Art's new 800mm lens really can do the job. No, I think of how you saw the light and make the shot, and that's what interests me.
Yeah, it is all about how you use the camera that's in your hand. And so people, when I give lectures, a lot of times I'm walking through museums in Europe with an iPhone photographing famous paintings that I incorporate into my lectures. And so some people are surprised that I'm even using an iPhone, but in fact, they're good for a certain use for pictures on, the internet, or where a bigger camera might garner a lot more attention from museum officials. It's the iPhones that started popping up everywhere that actually opened up museums because they couldn't control it. And so now you can go into fine art museums and photograph, and as long as you're not using a flash or a tripod, you're good to go. And I think they don't understand how good a quality the images I'm getting. And if it's not the iPhone, it would be a R5 with a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. And I'm getting ones that are actually better than in the books in the gift store at the base of the museum. So it's been a great evolution of cameras. Tom, when I first started out, I was using ISOs of 25, then 50. And if you ever entertained ideas of photographing wild animals, that animal had to be asleep or dead to get it in focus because it was such slow film. So I'm always happy with where we are now, photographing the heavens and stars and everything else that were only a dream. 15 years ago, now they're a reality. You can capture beautiful photos of the Milky Way, and you don't have to put it on a machine that rotates with stars in the sky. It's really a great advance in technology.
Art, you are the one that will prefer a wide angle lens than a long lens. You're the one who likes to put a lot in the frame so that the viewer can look around.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a couple of books, done probably about 8 or 10 books on international wildlife, and everyone had a very distinct style. Migrations was an ode to MC Escher, this Dutch artist that did beautiful patterns. So that was a book of patterns. Rhythms from the Wild was inspired by Claude Monet, as earlier mentioned. I did a book called Vanishing Act, which was hiding the animal in plain sight. And that's where what you're suggesting, I really use smaller lenses to incorporate more of the environment. And I didn't want the animal being obvious. So I try to hide it with the complexity of the environment. And then The Living Wild was a wide angle study of animals in their environment, but the animal was prominent, but then it was a wide angle. So I got really close to a lot of animals to incorporate that wide angle. Otherwise, the animal would be too tiny in the frame. And more recently, I just did a book called Wild Lives, where it was a little bit of everything. It was portraits, it was action, it was camouflage. It was a little bit of every trick I've ever used when I was working on a book.
Let's talk about books then, Art.
Okay.
Because I think I saw you once saying that you cannot die while you do photography books.
Yeah, that's probably why I'm still doing this. I've got 3 or 4 books, 3 books that I have finished and several more in my mind that I'm working on. And I had a 92-year-old gay book editor in New York who would take a train in from Fire Island. And I did about 8 books with this really old, bent over man. And he would always say, Art, what's our next project? And then I would suggest, okay, we haven't done a book on wild cats. And he said, okay, I'll have a contract. And then I realized he was using me to stay alive. And more importantly, I had so much respect for the publisher that never retired him. At 92, he was still valuable in the office. But I think he was keeping me busy because he had to stay alive to, see these books to their end. And so I took from that a valuable lesson that as long as you have projects, you have reason to get out of bed. When you don't have a specific project or you're just shooting random images, it's less of a motivation. So I always had a target to shoot for, and it helped focus my attention when I'm in the field, but also a reason to get out of bed.
So photo books are your fountain of eternal youth.
If you look at me and you think I have the secret of eternal youth, then I don't think our connection is that clear.
How do you manage with all your time? Because you travel so much, like 9 months of the year, your photography, your projects, and how do you write your books as well? I mean, it blows my mind, to be honest.
Well, I don't write I will occasionally write the introductions, but I find really good writers that are perfect. Right now, I'm finishing up. And the reason I'm going to the CUM is I'm finishing up a book called Act of Faith. And this is, in fact, why I was in Barcelona and then Sevilla, was photographing the promenade, all the crazy Catholic traditions of their pointed hats. And so Act of Faith is not only a look at all the major religions around the world, but also voodoo, shamanism, tribal beliefs. It's what people believe. So faith is not necessarily just religion, it's what people believe. And so I have just found a writer that I'm going to call later today who has done a lot of studying on religions and how they're related. He's a professor in Houston, Texas, and that's his bailiwick. That's what he likes to write about. So finding writers that can write the text for all the various books has been a great challenge. But Deirdre in my office, I've got an able staff that pay attention and read a lot. So between the family here and then a publisher that also has good connections, who's down in San Rafael, California, he has connections to writers. So it takes a village, Richard, to do a book, but the inception of an idea generally starts with me. Where do I want to go? What kind of a story do I tell? And more importantly, has it been done by me before or by a lot of other people? So I like to surprise my audience just when they think, oh, I know Art Wolfe, he's the wildlife photographer. Out comes a book on faith. So I love to surprise the audience and keep them tuned in.
With all the traveling you do, you're not just concentrating on one book while you travel, you are concentrating on multiple books already.
Yeah, I have very little talent for a lot of other things. The things that I excel at are gardening, Japanese style gardening. So I've got a beautiful Japanese style garden that I created, and I work in the trees, bonsaiing every year. The other thing is I think I'm good at is compartmentalizing projects when I'm in the field. Like my mind can switch over from shooting something for faith to something that could be for another book, and that could be for another book. I can divide my brain and keep it free enough to take advantage of the serendipity, the things I would not have predicted seconds before or unfolding. And I said, that would be perfect for this book. So I'm really good at doing that and organizing. I make lists of everything I need to do. There's 3 notepads right here, and each one is for the next day, the next day, the next day. I am not reliant on my memory. So I write things down and I stay focused because I'll be home for 10 days and I'll be gone for 3 weeks and home for 2 weeks and gone for 5 weeks. And so you have to be organized. And I pack, the day I get back from a long trip, if it's not crazy late at night, I'll wash the clothes, repack my travel bag so that when I'm home, I have at least the time to go out to dinner with friends or see a movie or whatever it may be before I'm on the road again. So I maximize the time very judiciously so that I don't forget something on the road or I don't get overwhelmed with a very busy schedule.
Art, talk me a bit about your latest book, Wild Lives. What was the initial for this book?
Yeah, we live at a time of terrible politics. And, well, I don't have to tell you, around the world, there's a lot of conflict. We top that off with COVID internationally, top that off with climate change that's affecting all of our lives. And if you turn on the news, it's all negative. If it bleeds, it leads. And so I wanted to remind people that there's animals out there that are thriving even with climate change. There's more whales in the ocean now than there has been since 1950. There's more mountain lions in North America than the last 200 years. Animals are surviving because they're just as tenacious as humans. Some species like polar bears are really being affected by the receding ice in the Arctic, but other species are thriving because there's more krill in the warmer waters down in Antarctica. So the animals that eat krill, penguins, and whales are exploding in populations. And
Mm.
snow leopards are holding strong. Tigers in India are growing in numbers by 10% a year. Mountain gorillas are growing by 10% a year. So those positive stories, I think, need to be told to keep people tuned in and uplifted a little bit so that they don't just give up on whatever. And so I've always been that way. The books I've worked on were intended to inspire, educate, and uplift rather to demoralize people. And certainly there's enough things out there that can make people depressed. And so that's what I want to do. That's my contribution to the art world, but also natural history and natural elements. So that's what keeps me going all the time.
How do you see your role of photography, like photography books in particular, faring in the digital age? How do you see it progressing?
Well, we have a very good printer just outside Hong Kong. The Chinese are good at emulating technology and then improving on a lot of that technology. And when it comes to printing, the Chinese are as good as any other place around the world. And so I see my books being presented in a stronger, more graphic, better paper, better inks, more longevity way. And that's a great trend. And those books that I do are a legacy that I leave behind when I'm gone. I don't have children. I don't have a lot of things that an average family or person would have, but what I have is a great life. And so the legacy would be the books rather than anything else. Yeah, the trees that I've got in my yard, which I've taken care of for 35 years, will grow up into big trees and when I'm gone. So I don't look at those trees as being a legacy, but the books can. And so we all kind of want reminders that we existed at one time or the other. A lot of people have children and grandchildren that will be a remembrance down the road. Other people use artwork on walls to make their chicken scratch, and that's universal. Wherever I go, I'm photographing people and walls that are just covered with people's need to write their name or have a heart or something. And so someday that could actually be a book. And so everybody wants some sort of thing they leave behind that will remind people that you actually existed at one point.
What would you like to be most remembered for with your photography work in particular?
Amongst my colleagues, I think I do enjoy when one of my colleagues that I've never met reaches out and says that they've paid attention and they like your work. I think I pay more attention to people that take pictures professionally. And when they give me credit for this or that, that means a lot to me. I never enter contests. I've never entered a photo contest, but when an honor is bestowed upon you, I think that means a lot to me. And so having awards coming out of nowhere mean a lot to me as opposed to trying to be judged by somebody else. I don't know if that answered your question. I took it off on a slight journey there, but I hope that answered your question.
I was thinking about our travels to the edge. Talk me about this experience, this 26 episode, aired in many countries. What were the biggest challenges you had there doing this art?
The biggest challenge was for me to be working with the head photographer who also worked with Rick Steves, still works with Rick Steves, who's an American history professor, I think, who has done a very successful TV series for a very long time showing us Europe. And so this photographer we also used on Travels to the Edge. And like any videographer, if they see something, they want to get it now. And I would always be at odds with him because I'm taking him to places he's never been. And if you take the time to shoot this, well, there's something better just 10 minutes down the road. That always was the source of conflict. The other thing about Travels to the Edge, to make it economically feasible, we'd also do 3 different episodes in 30 days. And that was exhausting because to do a 28-minute half-hour show, they would often shoot 30 hours of footage. And so a lot of my words, a lot of the things I was talking about never saw the light of day. And I like to be very judicious on what I shoot and be very focused on that. And I think Travel's Edge was the polar opposite. It was like shoot everything and then wind up editing that down. And so that was challenging for me. Physically, it it wasn't that difficult because I was only doing what I've done for the previous 3 decades. That crew was small. There was only 4 of us. So we had a cameraman, we had a second cameraman that was doing nature sounds and just little vignettes. And then we had a helper that would, make sure everything was, in our hands when we needed it if we forgot it. So I liked the crew a lot. And I think the odds I was having with, I'll say his name, Carl, actually made the show better. Because if everybody disagrees on everything, it's maybe not as good as it could be. And in fact, that's something I've learned over the years also with all the books I've worked on, that it takes a team. It takes editors, it takes designers, it takes writers to make a really good book. And every book I ever worked on, I wouldn't get all the photos I wanted in the book, but other ideas that came in from other places made the book stronger. So, and in fact, that's what I learned from my own staff, that if you don't micromanage and tell them everything that you want them to do, they thrive on their independence. And so those are lessons learned over the years. So that's Travel's Edge. We went, from the Sahara to the Antarctic to the polar regions, into the Amazon, up into the Himalayas. Everywhere I wanted to take people, we went. And one of the best ones was Mali, Africa, and the Dogon people and other tribal people. It was great, but 2 years later, it was invaded by Al Qaeda identifying people, and Mali then became a dangerous place to be. When we were in Timbuktu, Mali, about to go north into the desert, we had 15 people with automatic rifles and turbines in a second Jeep following us because they were going to fight with whoever they needed to keep us alive. And it was like, I kept on saying, I'm happy that they're on our team, because when they're wearing turbans and they got sunglasses and they got automatic rifles, you want them to be your friends.
Can it be also had to wear one time a turban not to scare camels?
Well, you have done your research, I have to say, Tom. Yeah, I mean, getting close to shoot a wide angle shot of camel drivers coming out of the heart of the Sahara. If I got that close and I was wearing a baseball hat, the camels react. But wearing a turban, I look just like everybody else to the camel. And so I could get really wide angle close to them. And that's the reason they said, put on the turban. Otherwise, you're going to have camels that want to kind of leave you. And it's like, okay, not for this shot.
The monkeys in Japan, Art, how close can you get to them?
Well, when I first, I think I was perhaps one, if not the first American professional to photograph the snow macaques. That's a good, I would say 40 years ago, maybe 35 years ago. And when I was there was 2 old Japanese photographers that I saw every day for 3 days. But back then you couldn't get within, say, 2 meters of the snow macaques. Today, they'll come out of the water and climb on top of your camera. I think you probably saw the shot of the monkey looking into the lens with Gabrielle holding the camera. So that, and now when you go, there's 1,000 people a day. On a good day, there'll be 1,000 people that will come all day long. But the result then is the monkeys are standing below you. Sometimes they're climbing your tripod. They are so accessible that you can actually get shots that you couldn't have gotten before. But you just have to be careful of not including the hordes of other people that are around you.
You knew well Galen Rowell, Art?
I did. He
How
and
was he
I
as a person?
very charismatic. He was 10 years older than I was. And seeing how he was able to make a life shooting mountains encouraged me into a business that I never thought would become a business. And
Mm,
unfortunately, as you know, he had a tragic death with his wife
mm,
coming back from
mhm,
yet another trip. So he was complex, he was very articulate. His mother was very smart and I think a musician as well. And he was inspired by his mother a lot. And yeah, we lost a good one too early in life. And now when you see famous climbers that are raising money for schools and things like that, you just hope they have the ability to know not to climb something beyond their skill. And because those kind of people that have the spirit of adventure, we want on this planet. We don't want to lose them when they're 25 and they made a risky
mhm.
move and suddenly they're gone. So I put climbers and explorers and scientists in the same category, that they all contribute to the health of society. And they could be the ones that help solve our issues about climate change. So climate change is a natural phenomenon, but there's no doubt
Mm,
we've accelerated the speed with which ice is disappearing, certainly the soot in the
mhm,
air and all of that. So, but there are very intelligent people that are working in NGOs or startups that are focusing on this problem or that problem, but they don't get the credit or the awareness because there's so much other
mhm.
negativity going on in the planet right now. I see I drift. You asked me one question and I take it on its own journey. So I'm sorry for that if I'm not succinct
I
in
love it.
answering.
I
Oh,
I was
good.
just thinking, imagine if you had tequila, where we would go.
Yeah, there would be a few salty words, I'm sure. I'm being proper here. The thing about that, Tom, is if you spend most of your life out in the muck, up to your ass in bird guano, you better be pretty open to ideas and not take yourself too seriously. And a good sense of humor also goes a long ways, because what we do
Yeah.
uh, as photographers is we bring important stories to the public. And I do believe a single salient, emotionally impactful image can be more powerful than the written word. But you also have to have that sense of humor. If all you do is extremely important stuff, but you don't have humor in your life, I think it can get people down. And I cite war correspondents that have taken their own lives, that get so caught
Mm,
up in the negativity that they're documenting, and they're very valuable to have, but they are less careful with their psychology, I believe, and some of them wind up demoralized by what they've seen in life. And that is one of the reasons that I try to work on projects that keep me moving, 5 decades later with excitement, rather than having chosen a different path photographically that can really work against your psychology. I think we're fragile, in other words. I think the line between
mm.
sanity and insanity is often right on the borderline when you are cut off in traffic, or, for momentary lapses, we're angry and we kind of lose it. But then hopefully you bounce right back to your normal self.
Then let's talk a bit more about humor, Art. It lifts our
Okay,
spirits.
go
Tell
ahead.
me the most crazy thing ever you did to take a picture, and not the one with the mountain goats where you peed on a rock. I know this one. Richard maybe doesn't know it. What's the most crazy things you did to get a shot, Art?
Well, okay. I would frequently give slideshows in Seattle as I was getting out of college and becoming a photographer. I would give public talks, but I would go at great lengths to make jokes. For instance, I did a series of photos of snowshoeing Seattle where there's no snow. And I would have the snowshoer in the middle of traffic snowshoeing, and people would be looking at them like, what the hell is going on with that guy? Or up on the top of our football stadium, I had them snowshoeing on the top. I got permissions. And so that's a degree of the length that I would go to carry on a joke within presentation. I I had all these photos of animals sniffing your armpits. And so I had a little can that I made up that was called Art Wolfe's Wilderness Scent, that if you spray this on yourself, animals came out of nowhere. So I had, a grizzly bear nibbling on my neck, which was a trained bear. I had a mountain goat standing right above me. I had deer. Over the years, you get these animals that are just fearless that will come up to you. And so I would take advantage of that. But I think the most crazy thing I did was years ago under Ronald Reagan as president, he had a James Watt as the Secretary of the Interior. And James Watt wanted to cut the forests. So I made up a big sign that had the emblem of the National Forest Service, and I placed it off a major highway in the mountain range east of Seattle where there was a clear cut, and I called it James Watt's National Forest. And thousands of people a day would look at this sign, and it looked so professional that they thought it was real. And I was just doing it as a condemnation of James Watt. And I would have been arrested if somebody knew I had done that. And years before that, when I was even 13, I destroyed some bulldozers and road graders that were carving up the forest that I grew up in or near. And so I was able to disable all these major machinery. And eventually, within a week, the developer, who was already in his mid-90s, died from a stroke. I didn't think what I did to the machinery led to the stroke, but the family of that man donated the entire forest to the city, and now it's a wild area preserved forever. So when I was young, I did some crazy things, but always in the name of preserving the natural habitat. And all the people that worked on that machinery are long gone because I was only 13 at the time. So, statute of limitations are gone. And I can tell that story finally without, I think, retribution.
You love to work under pressure, Art. It's like your energy drink to always stimulate yourself and to come up with something new.
I really work hard at coming up with something new because I knew a photographer that was older than me that loved photographing ducks. You've probably heard this story. And when he photographed every type of duck in North America, he was no longer interested in taking pictures. He had done what he wanted. And so I always use that as a metaphor for constantly redefining what I'm interested in and pushing my career and my spirit forward. So I'm always evolving into different genres, knowing full well that the artists that I studied in art history had one style. For the most part, they had one style that they were known for, but I don't have one style. I don't know if I have a style, but certainly I love all these different genres. And I intentionally do that to keep writer's block or photographer's block from happening. And that is what writers sometimes face. They run out of inspiration, and it's deadly for their career. So I think photographers and painters are wired the same way. As long as we are still engaged in finding new ideas and new locations, we won't run out of ideas.
You told while you studied art school that in that time you didn't understand Picasso still because you were too young.
So it was more, Picasso was still, I didn't understand that. I mean, I got it a little bit, but Jackson Pollock and the other abstract expressionists, I didn't understand at all. And expressionists were painting non-objective work, which meant, in objective work, you understand that's a horse, a dog, a road, a tree, a forest, a mountain. Non-objective was in anything we recognize. And so they would famously say that their paintings end where your imagination as a viewer begins. So they were trying to tap into the viewer or our subconscious and imagine what it possibly could represent. And so I was too young and too immature in college because I was right out of high school. I knew paintings of trees and landscapes and still life and things like that, but I didn't understand abstract expressionism. Picasso wasn't really that much of an abstract expressionist, but he certainly had a varied career because he painted, he sculpted, he created still lives. I mean, he did a great variety of subjects, whereas Jackson Pollock threw paint on the wall or on the floor and created beautiful, large paintings, but that's the style he's known for. And you could argue that many of the French Impressionists also had a unique style that they stayed with throughout their lives. So I tackled on abstract expressionists. I started going out photographing very similar to their work. And then I started teaching that in degraded environments around North America and also Cuba. So Cuba and Astoria, Oregon, and other places which have a lot of rust, a lot of peeling paint, a lot of degraded environments. I would give a lecture on William de Kooning or Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko. These are famous abstract expressionists. And I would say, go out into this old, forgotten landscape or urban environment where it's degraded and find your own creative work. And people love it. People love it. So you set the right hook and people take it. And those are among the most popular workshops I give. And certainly not one that a lot of my colleagues would be trained to teach, because many of my colleagues come in from a biology background or a science background, whereas I'm coming in like you from a perspective of art.
Ask away, Richard.
Get weird. So you've probably been asked this many times, but for those who are like starting out in their photography careers, what would you say is like a main takeaway for them starting off at their photography, whether it's landscapes, nature, whatever it may be?
Yeah, the first thing I'd tell them is this is not a choice of a business or a job. If you think of it as a job, you are unlikely to succeed. You have to think of it as a complete lifestyle. So you have to live it, breathe it, give your life over to it to be successful. If you think of, young people come up and they'll say things like, what should I expect to make the first year in salary? And I say, if you have to think along those lines, you're unlikely to do it. But I encourage many of them to take up photography as a passion and have a job where you can pay the bills, because it's not what it used to be. It's unlikely that any young photographer can live the life I've had, simply because so much of where I went has changed. I'm talking about cultures and landscapes and so forth and so on, that nobody's going to start out like I did and get to where I am simply because they want to do it. It's a different world now. And so there's so many people competing for air on the internet or in magazines that are fewer devoted to photography and nature. I say you're better off just finding a job that pays the bills and keep photography as happiness and passion, rather than something you are going to be stressing over trying to make a justification that you're a photographer. Because the minute it becomes stressful and hard, you're not going to look at photography as the same way I do, which has always been positive and a happy place. So that's what I tell people. It's much more difficult now than it was. There's a lot more people on the planet. There's a lot more people taking pictures, and there's a lot more professionals and semi-professionals that have been inspired by Franz Lanting or Galen Rowell or Jim Brandenburg and perhaps myself. We've encouraged a lot of people to do what we do, but to the point where it's much more difficult because there's a lot of people out there shooting.
So I know that Tom asked Moose Peterson when he was on, and Tom asked whether he'd can remember like one particular breakthrough moment, and Moose is like he didn't feel like he ever had that breakthrough or that moment in his career. But what about for yourself? Have you got a particular fond memory of, oh, I've made it to the peaks, or
No, I think it's just been a steady climb. This year alone, I've been bestowed with Lifetime Achievement Award from the University of Washington, which has 90,000 students. So it's a big learning institution. I've been awarded by the new governor of the state, award that will be given to me in April on exploring and being an environmentalist. There's an exclusive club in downtown Seattle that costs a lot of money to be a member each month, and they're giving me a lifetime membership. I would never dream that these awards or honors would come my way. It's just been a steady, slow climb, and I know nothing else at this point. And so I don't think there was any monumental moment that I felt like I've arrived. Probably in the early days, it was when I was getting an article in National Geographic or Audubon or Smithsonian. Those were minor moments of happiness, but then you're working on the next project. And so you move on. And so those weren't like big breakthrough moments. I think it's just been a steady incline on something. There's very few people that travel as much as I do that have worked on as many books or TV shows as I have. And I'm not saying that they should have, because they're raising families and they've got other priorities in addition to being photographers. But I'm kind of on one track. And so I live it, I breathe it. And finally now in the last quarter of my life, people are starting to recognize the contribution. And as I said, I never entered contests to become photographer of the year. It wasn't the way I was motivated. It's just been a slow process of people.
Art, before we go to a bit more fun questions, advocating for conservation has always been a great topic in your books and in your life. Has there been a place you visited, like say in 20 years between, where you in real life noticed climate change?
Definitely a lot. Almost anywhere in the polar regions is the most obvious when it comes specifically to climate change. That's where we're seeing the most drastic results. What used to be a glacier behind a group of penguins now is barren rock. That's South Georgia. I've been up in the far Canadian Arctic, Greenland as well. And you see glaciers receding everywhere. And it gives me pause to think about Southeast Asia, India, the subcontinent of India, and other countries in and around the Himalayas are reliant on glaciers feeding the rivers that keep them alive. What will happen when those glaciers are gone? There will be a mass human movement. We're seeing that out of North Africa and Syria to Europe, but we'll see a lot more people moving unless we reclaim water. We're on a planet of water. And the very fact that we're running out of fresh water means we need to really develop the technology to use the seawater for our own survival. We have the technology, it's just very expensive. When it comes to human change, I see a lot more rapid change in remote cultures that I was in. Cite the Omo River of Ethiopia. Many people have now gone there. there was Leni Riefenstahl, who was a German lady that photographed in and around that region very early on after World War II. Then Carol Beckwith and Angela Fisher, fellow British citizens, did a great series of books of African traditions, including the Omo. And then Gav and I went in right after them, and I included the work from the Omo in books, which then got the awareness of travel companies that specialized in photography tours, and they latched onto it. And then everybody else wanted to go there. And so when Gav and I went, we were reliant on our own vehicles, our own food. There was no tradition there. And after us, and after an episode of Travel's Edge, it really opened the world up. And I regret that immensely, to the extent now that if I'm in a really delicate environment or a culture, I'm not going to identify exactly where that was, because now I realize that in the age of Instagram and instant travel, people, which I never thought would go through what I went through to get to these locations, are going there now. And they may not have the same sensitivity that we did, which was never leave any trace that we were there. Even if the people are in rags, we're not going to give them the shirt off our back, because that is what their culture was. And people now are giving baseball hats and T-shirts and sunglasses, and it really changes culture. And the minute we lose a culture, the minute we lose a language, the earth is diminished. And so we're extremely careful about bringing in something to give to them, but it's usually the food that they normally would grow. We would bring in additional food that they would consume and it'd be gone. And so we never just take. We try to contribute, but we don't want to contribute to the changing of their world. And well, certainly a lot of groups that came in after us have changed the Omo drastically. So I see more change, obviously, because I'm not always up in the Arctic or the Antarctic. I'm traveling into India and other places. And, you know, the Western creep of civilization is very real, and it changes cultures. In another way, it's amazing how when you used to go to Asia, people were lean and skinny, and now they've adopted a lot of the bad eating habits of the West, and they're getting fat. I mean, there's fat monks where they used to be emaciated. Now they're eating hamburgers and Colonel chicken and things like that. So yeah, change is hard to hold off, but I don't think we can accelerate it by publicly saying where it is and go there and change it.
In all those notebooks you have lying there, Art, you have some cultures you want to visit before they change?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned early the Saudi Arabia. You know, I want to go there right now, because when they open Saudi Arabia up to tourism on a mass way, everything that we see in a couple of months will change. It will change. So Bedouin culture in remote areas of Saudi Arabia would inevitably change as the tourism comes that way. I want to see Uzbekistan for act of faith. I've always been enamored of the Silk Road and how merchants would travel from the Mediterranean into the East. And so that comes from, my history background as well. So there's a lot of places I want to see, or traditions I want to see before they're gone. And I've gone and seen most of it that I had on my hit list, including the Garo Wall in the country of Chad. I went and photographed that a couple years ago, and that will go into the Act of Faith. I've seen mostly the animals I've ever wanted to see. I've been able to see it. So I have a degree of satisfaction that in my short lifetime, all the things I wanted to see, I basically have seen, but there's new things I'm discovering every day. So it'll occupy the rest of my life, I'm sure.
They never make it difficult for you to enter? No.
China did, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
I have no desire to see the Soviet Union again. I'm not crazy about the leader, of course. But no, I haven't had much difficult because I'm not a journalist. I don't have an axe to grind politically, publicly. I want to celebrate what's there that's positive. And so generally, I haven't really run into too many obstacles. But I'm not walking the Syrian-Iraq border anytime soon. I don't put myself intentionally into harm's way. Oh, I did that once in Ulaanbaatar. I got in between protesters and the police with Gabrielle, and we were photographing it, thinking we were, war correspondents. But tear gas was landing near us, and bricks were landing near us. And I said, I think we should leave. And that night, 5 people were killed, and they burned down the communist headquarters in Mongolia because Democratic Party had won, but the communists declared victory. So they they burned the building to the ground. On the very night that we were there with the film crew, Travels to the Edge. So that got a little close. It got a little heated. And the president declared martial law. And the flight that we were going to take in the morning didn't leave till 2 a.m. the next day. So everything was disrupted for a week as things settled down. I've got stories and stories and stories. There's a writer that wants to do a biography kind of book, a memoir book, and been interviewing. And someday that will happen, probably within the next couple of years, because I've got the memory for a lot of the stories. I forget names really quickly as I teach a lot of workshops, and it's very hard, but faces I recognize. But show me a photo that I've taken 40 years ago, and I'm likely to identify exactly what was happening when I took the picture because I got that kind of targeted memory.
You see, it must be all the tequila that is helping you, Art.
Yeah.
Let's go to end this a bit to more fun questions.
Okay.
What's, Art, a hidden talent or a passion that people maybe don't know about you?
Well, I think I've revealed pretty much everything. I am gay. If you were going there, that has not ever been a liability for me. It's just who we are, like left-handers or whatever. I think everything I've talked about, from bonsaiing trees to travel to coming up with new ideas, that's all part of my path to keeping doing this for 5 decades.
If you could time travel, Art, from which painter you would love to have a class?
Oh, which painter? Which style? I would have to say it would be Jackson Pollock, because he died in a car accident. He was alcoholic, but he certainly created an amazing body of work now that I understand what he was after. So he would have been one of the painters. Anybody in the French Impressionist period, Gauguin, Monet, Manet, Seurat, all those different French Impressionists inspired me for works of art that I turned into styles of photography. So I've drawn a lot over the years from painters, whether it's that period in the mid 1800s in France or in America, post-war America. Abstract expressionism has inspired me. So I started emulating a Jackson Pollock, and then suddenly I start to shoot the chaos of his compositions naturally. So once I start emulating it, you absorb it, and then it becomes part of your own, vocabulary. Visual vocabulary is a good way to put it.
I was going to say, Tom and I are foodies, so we really love our food.
Me too.
So what do you miss while you're traveling? Like, what's your favorite go-to?
I think Japanese food, Mexican food, Vietnamese food, those are among my favorite. Yeah, those would be my favorite. So, I mean, Seattle's 7 hours away from Tokyo on a good day, 9 hours if you're heading west, or 7 hours if you're heading east. So, the Asian aesthetic of culture is what I've adopted in my garden. And certainly the minimalist way Japanese live, for the most part, is influenced. And the variety of food that you get in Japan, I love taking people up to Hokkaido and staying in little inns and having a variety of tempura or sashimi and that kind of food. Mexico, if you go to Mexico, it is a great cuisine. If all you know of Mexican food is tacos and enchiladas or burritos, then you're really not aware of Mexican food. Italian pizzas, French cooking. The world's good play. The worst food I ever had was actually in Tibet, because back in 1984, in the winter of 84, when we were passing from Lhasa to the base camp of Mount Everest, we were served food that was unedible. And so I'll never forget that. That's not a place for foodies. But Vietnam, as I mentioned, is always great for its fresh ingredients. I like Thai food, food in general. That's why I'm so heavy right now. I love food.
How are your cooking skills, Art?
When I have to cook, I'm really good at cooking. I pay attention. I follow. I look briefly at the cooking instructions, but I'm pretty good at just throwing things together and coming up with something good. I learned a lot from Gabriel Jacan. Romanians are like Italians. In fact, Romania is the second Rome. So they had a lot of cooking skills that I've learned from Gabriel over the years as well. But once or twice a year, I'll cook for my nieces, and I love it. I plan it, and cooking is a great diversion for me, but it's not something that I do very often. I cook for myself. I mean, I'll make chicken tacos and things like that are really easy, but that's just for me. If I'm cooking for somebody else, I really want it to be special. I'm not really a traditionalist when it comes to celebrating what a lot of people celebrate, because it's just another workday for me. And I'm not miserable about that. It's just that, who am I giving presents to? Nobody at this point. This is currently Wednesday midday. Day after tomorrow, I'll have about 75 people for dinner. I show them a presentation from all the travels I did this year. And this has been a tradition I've kept up for 40 years. And the next day, Saturday, I have all the surviving members of the Everest expedition coming over to my house, and I'll give them a presentation looking back some 40 years ago, what we looked like and what we did. And then in about the end of January, I'm inviting the University of Washington president, the current governor of our state, other people that I've met over the last couple of years. I'll have a special party for them. So I do that every year because most times I'm gone. So to keep up relationships with people, you have to work at it. And I do it through the gatherings at my home.
Sounds amazing.
It's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Richard, I think we have to leave this man to his Japanese garden now because
it's not raining, so I got to get out there.
You see. Art, thanks so much for this talk. I hope we can do it again, maybe next year, or when you have another good story to tell, you let me know. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
As it has been for me. Thank you very much, Tom and Richard.
Thank you very much, Art. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Take good care, Art. We see you around.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And that was our conversation with Art Wolfe, folks, a photographer whose curiosity and energy seems to have no finish line. If you enjoyed this episode, folks, you'll find links below to Art's work, his books, and upcoming workshops. If you like more conversations like this, please consider subscribing here on YouTube. You can also listen to the Camera Cafe show, of course, on your podcast player, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with future guests. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Keep your eyes open, keep shooting, and of course, keep moving your own photography forwards. Adios.